Hello everybody, welcome to my tiny Fibre studio. I'm Bex. If you haven't joined me before, then welcome. Pull up a chair, grab a beverage, settle down, and we'll talk about what I'm knitting at the moment. I have been doing a little bit of thinking and sort of experimenting recently about the format of me keeping you up to date with my projects. I've up to now done podcast episodes where I talk about each of the things that I'm working on, but that doesn't work particularly well for me. I feel like it's a huge production to sit down and record those podcast episodes. Also, my brain has this weird thing where it feels under pressure and therefore can't get a sentence out properly, which is not a problem in normal everyday life because part of my job is kind of presentations. So, yeah. Also, I'm not sure that podcast episodes really work that well for other people, because if you see interesting or useful information in a podcast episode, it's often very difficult to find that again later. So I'm hoping that this kind of project diary style will work a little bit better, both for me and for you as well. If you find this video helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would give it a thumbs up, hit the like button, subscribe, and leave me a comment. Let me know what you're working on at the moment, or if this has kind of inspired you to work on the same thing. So, I have just finished my wool and honey sweater, which I'm very pleased with, but it did take about a year from start to finish, although I was working on a lot of other stuff alongside it. But it was garter stitch in the round, and that grows incredibly slowly. so slowly. So slowly, in fact, that I was probably about down to here, and it took me a full 11.5-hour stint of knitting to get all the way down to the bottom of the sleeve. Yeah. It would not normally take me that long, even in fingering weight. So I needed a palette cleanser at the end of all of that garter stitch. So as I was sitting here finishing wool and honey, I was looking at my yarn cabinet, which is just behind the camera, and I was thinking about all of the handspun and thinking about the things that I might want to do with it. At the same time, I was also thinking, my neck's just a little bit chilly, and so I figured that a nice little cowl might be a good project for a palette cleanser. So looking at my yarn cabinet, there were a few skeins that particularly jumped out at me, and one of those was a set that I made from World of Wool's carded Corriedale 5 Shades of Grey sample collection. Now I did this right at the beginning of Tiny Fibre Studio. I am pretty sure that it's a thumbnail for one of the early episodes, so if you want to try and find it, I'll try and put a link in the description below, but if not, you'll probably see it in the thumbnail. And I've kind of caked those up, so they are living in my hide and hammer bag. I'll just grab a few of them, just to give you an idea. Already put that one on. The butterfly cape. So this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about, and this is mostly Aran weight. It does go down to kind of DK weight on this one, and I don't think I changed the structure. I don't think I did. Maybe I did. Maybe that's the reason. That is a 2-ply. This is where this is going to turn out to be a 3-ply, isn't it? Did I make this a 3-ply? Yes, I did. Okay, so we have most of it as 3-ply and one as a 2-ply. Why? I don't know. Can't change it now. Never mind. We're going to work with it. So I knew how much of it I had. So I went on to Ravelry, started kind of doing a little bit of browsing around, and I found the Escarpment Cowl. It's by Shireen Nadir, and it's a really nice, simple little pattern. Loads of people have used it for handspun. I think Rachel Smith from Wool and Spinning might have used it as one of her sort of example projects at some stage, and had people doing a knit along with it, so that might be why there's so many handspun projects. But it looks like a great one for just using up small quantities of handspun. My plan is just to start with the lightest shade and then just work my way down and just stripe it, just changing yarn as soon as I run out of one colour. This first one, the lightest shade, is very over twisted, but I think is over twisted in both the spin and the ply, so I can't really do very much about that at the moment, but I knitted up a little sample of it and it was fine. I'm not going to worry about trying to take out additional twist at this point. So I lied, slash I changed my mind. I decided that I wasn't happy with the amount of twist that the lighter version of the yarn had in it. So I've just really quickly, it took me probably 10 minutes to just run it back through the spinning wheel with the opposite to the ply twist. Some of it didn't need a lot of twist taken out, so I used my Shat Matchless to give myself a little bit more kind of control over where I did want to take twist out and where I didn't. And I've just steam set it over the kettle. I want to use this straight away. I don't want to have to wait for it to dry. So if I steam set it, you know, it's a teensy bit damp, but it's absolutely fine to use straight away. So yeah, taking the twist out, much happier with the yarn. Let's get on with the knitting. So, a couple of days in, and we are down to the 5th shade of grey. I decided to do this as quite a tight gauge because I could also use it for cycling. Some days in winter when it's really cold, or you know, really cold for the UK, which is pretty warm for a lot of other places, I have a cycling jacket that kind of comes up quite high around the neck. So this will actually sit quite nicely over my mouth so that my mouth doesn't get cold, and if necessary it can go over my nose as well if I need a disguise. When it is folded under like this, it's actually quite nice and gapey around the neck, so I can kind of adjust that. So yeah, went for a fairly tight gauge. This is on 5mm needles and the yarn is roughly Aran weight-ish. So yeah, it's coming out quite nicely. I did have to frog it once because, you know, I'm Bex and what's a project without having to frog it at least once. Only once so far though. So this line of increases that should be down the centre of the cowl, when I looked at it, I'd done loads of knitting on it. I was probably most of the way through this 4th shade of grey, and I looked at it and I was like, that is not straight. So at some point I had either missed an increase or done an increase on a row where I shouldn't have done, and yeah, it was all a bit skewed. So I ripped that out. What I've been doing is just with each shade of grey, I'm just trying to use as much yarn as possible. So on the first colour, there's a fair little chunk there. What I do in cases like this where I'm trying to use as much yarn as possible is I will just leave little bundles. I don't actually cut the yarn until I've completely finished and I'm happy with it, just in case I decide to do something completely different and then I need to salvage as much yarn as I can. There was there's a spit splice round about here because I got to the end of the 2nd grey and I literally had about that much left. So not enough to be able to get to the end of the row and leave a suitable weaving tail. So I just spit spliced it with the next colour and it blends in fine. that works perfectly okay. What I decided to do with this last grey was to just use it for the ribbing. I haven't bothered doing any stocking stitch section with this. A couple of reasons. One is just that there isn't that much of a colour difference between the two. There's a little bit, but it's not as distinct as something like, you know, going from any of those three. So the other reason is that this is quite a lot thinner than the others, and so I figured if I only use it in the garter stitch section, you're not really going to see the difference, whereas if I'd started it in the stocking stitch bit, that would have been a lot more obvious. So there we go, that's progress so far, and I will continue knitting, and I'll see you in a moment. Ta-da! Finished. Well, almost finished. I haven't blocked it yet. What I'm slightly concerned about is that it is curling a little bit. So I'm hoping that once that's blocked, that will go away, but it's probably because the garter stitch isn't giving it as much structure as it should do. So you've got all this quite tight gauge stocking stitch, and then it's a much looser gauge by the time you get to the thinner yarn that's doing the garter stitch. But we'll see. I'm going to block it, and we'll see what happens. So it is done. I'm very happy with it. This is the long side, but you could also flip it around like that. Have the shorter bit at the front, maybe. Entirely up to you. I normally do tend to wear it this way around though. This took about 2 days just working in the afternoons, but you could very easily crank one out in one day. So that makes it a really good gifting option if you're trying to get some quick gifts done. The curling issue that I was having was resolved by blocking, so that was really nice. And yeah, I would definitely make another one. I think it's quite an easy pattern or recipe to adapt as well. You could add lace and all sorts of other bits and pieces in there. The other thing that I thought about was that if you were using up a little sample set like I was, you could stripe those yarns, so you could start with the lightest and the next lightest and just keep striping those one row at a time, or 2 rows at a time or whatever, until you ran out of one, and then switch to the next darkest colour and carry on that way. Might be an option. So yeah, very happy with it. And that is one project done and a few little skeins of handspun out of my cabinet. So this was a great stash buster for very small quantities of handspun. I would love to know if you've got any other recommendations for really good handspun patterns. Let me know what you think about this project diary style video. It's been a lot easier for me to film, and that will mean that I will be able to get more episodes out rather than waiting to do a whole podcast episode that can feel like it takes an entire day to film. So please let me know if that works for you. Hopefully it does. If you have found this video useful, somehow entertaining, then please do give it a thumbs up, leave me a comment and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, because all of those things really help the channel and it helps this video to be seen by other people who might find it useful. If you want to find me on social media in between now and the next video, you can find me on Instagram. I'm Tiny Fibre Studio on there, and I'm also on Ravelry as Ibex. I hope this video was useful. I hope it has distracted you a little bit if you're currently in the middle of the coronavirus crisis, as we are right now. Take care, and I will see you again soon.